Hello, welcome back to Green, live from Cerulean event organized by Samudra Oceans. I'm here with Emma, my co-host. Ciao, Em.
Ciao, Francesca.
How are you?
I'm very well. I've come across London after a very busy morning and walked straight into an incredible panel discussion where two guys were going at it on deep sea mining. So without further ado.
Yes, so we are here with Alexander Nesiah, CEO and founder of Atlas and nMech Robotics. And we are with Nick Hardman-Mountford. Hi, Nick. You are a marine scientist.
Marine scientist, policy advisor, former diplomat, and worked in conservation. And now I advise organizations on how to scale sustainable ocean solutions.
Nice. What about you, Alex?
I'm the founder of nMech Robotics.
Mm-hmm.
We make robots that can operate anywhere from the deep sea to space. And we do this because we invented a new kind of motor called Helios that doesn't need any special modification to operate anywhere in this galaxy.
Fantastic.
And can be manufactured on any planet.
I thought we were talking about deep sea mining, but why not go to Mars while we're at it?
Let's take a very deep dive from Mars to the bottom of our oceans then. So you guys were having a Q&A moment until a few minutes ago on a panel here at Cerulean. And the topic of the conversation was, yes, deep sea mining, and especially what you, Alex, are proposing as a different way of technology in, let's say, in opposition of what it is currently thought right now in terms of deep sea mining, which is dredging, right? The floor dredging, which is obviously terrible. We know very little already about that environment, but we do know that whatever comes across the dredge is going to be destroyed. There is absolutely no
100%.
way of not modifying that kind of environment. So your solution, it is?
So Atlas is the deployment of these nMech robotics technology. What we plan to do is build lots of small robots that can be deployed at scale at sea. Small robots that go to the bottom of the sea, about 6 kilometers down, where there are large expanses of effectively white sand with these little black rocks called polymetallic nodules. And each of these polymetallic nodules, which is just simply sitting on the surface, have all your battery metals. So think of cobalt, nickel, copper, manganese, even some iron, and sometimes some trace metals as well of other kinds. And so all you have to do is pick up these rocks and send them to a processor, and you can get all the battery metals you need for the whole planet for thousands of years. The problem is 6 kilometers down, and there's no technology right now that can reliably operate at that depth. And that's why we need the technology from nMech Robotics. What Atlas is doing is deploying these robots in such a way that we can get these materials up at a fraction of the cost of mines that are currently getting these materials from rainforests. So our goal is really, in a sense, to bankrupt all these other mines, to switch the supply of raw materials to a sustainable mine that's environmentally friendly, that's good for the environment, helps the planet, reduces climate change by reducing the cost of batteries and electrification. And therefore, it's something that's very positive for the environment rather than destructive.
Sure. As we know, when we've read about deep sea mining,
Yes.
we all have some serious concerns.
Of course, I have serious concerns.
Good. First of all, though, before we move into the actual implications of what you're doing, just help me visualize it a little bit better in terms of, you say, deploying lots of robots. First of all, how many? Because that gives us an understanding of the scale of what you're trying to do.
Yes.
And potential impact there. But also, once they've picked up said rock delicately with their little tweezer-like fingers off the bottom of the sea, what do they then do with it to get it to the surface? Because I'm sure that there are follow-on implications there with regards to that movement.
Yes. So these, if you can imagine, just at the bottom of the sea, a little robot about the size of a person with 4 legs or arms, you want, like a gorilla, a chimpanzee.
Not one of those horrible dog type ones. That they keep
not one of those horrible dog type ones. This will be beautiful.
Those are creepy, yeah.
They pick up these rocks and put them in a basket. And there's a primary collection basket. It's a very simple model. We don't have these riser pipes, which is what the current systems use, which is a gigantic steel pipe that goes to the bottom of the sea that the way it operates now is extremely damaging. So first I'll give you the contrast. The way it operates now, you have a huge city-sized ship at the surface of the sea, then an enormous pipe that goes to the bottom, and that enormous pipe connects to these vacuum cleaner, like giant bulldozers, and they pump up all this rock and sand and water into a slurry and pump it up these pipes. That creates an incredible amount of dust, effectively like dust to go up into the water. So you can imagine like plumes of dust, like clouds of dust. And that also creates an enormous amount of noise. So if you're a whale and you're operating within thousands of kilometers, you're still hearing this. And whales are very sensitive to sound. So both the local environment as well as the distant environment gets damaged by the existing system. So I think we need a total ban on dredging. What we do is something completely different. We send down these little robots, and we can send them 10 at a time, 100 at a time, 1,000 at a time, 10,000 at a time. When you think of the size of the ocean, that's nothing. But one robot picking up as many rocks as maybe the square footage of a typical house can generate about $300,000 of these rocks per year. And why that's important is because right now we get all that value of rocks from places like Indonesia and Congo, where it causes a lot of environmental damage. They're blowing up mountains, getting rid of indigenous people, all those things. So what we're doing is simply taking these simple robots made out of a recycled material and getting these rocks, which are very high-grade metal sources. They put them in the basket, and then the basket simply floats up. It has an anchor, like a very simple metal anchor, steel anchor.
It's a basket full of rocks.
Basket full of rocks.
And it floats up.
It floats up because it's a flotation device. It's built like, so you can get this material, which is a kind of foam, which is very strong, but floats even at that depth. It's rated for that depth. So the basket has a large quantity of that foam. And we can fill it up with 20 tons of rocks, and it'll still float up. Very slowly, but it'll float up, because you just have a very large basket. And because all it has to do, it's a very simple mechanism. It goes down with an anchor, drops the anchor, and floats up. And the anchor is heavier than the load that's going in, which is why it can go down slowly, but then come up also very slowly. We just create a very small gap in that mass. And when it comes to the top, it just bobs on the surface, and you're just like a normal sized ship can go and pick up those rocks. So we don't need a city-sized ship. We can just use normal ships that already exist. And it's a very low cost, very practical, very passive. We just use the laws of physics. We don't have all these pumps and all these things. And so we don't make any noise. We don't disturb the whales. We don't destroy the sea life. There's some damage at the very bottom, inevitably, the same way that when you walk down the street, you may step on a worm or something like that. Or if you run in the grass, you may accidentally step on an ant or something without realizing. That kind of damage is inevitable with any human activity, but we're not actively wiping out species.
Alex, what Alex proposes, sounds quite Goldilocks, doesn't it, in terms of skipping down the path with a little basket and picking up these rocks and being completely harmful. Nick, what, as a marine biologist, what comes into mind that worries you about this?
Well, so first of all, the things we agree on is, the other proposed methods, and you call them current, but they're not current because there's no deep seabed mining happening yet. But these are the earlier designs that have been proposed that would dredge that bottom, absolutely destructive. And we both agree that is absolutely should be a no-go. And
I think there needs to be an outright ban on it.
Yeah. Now, but what, as a marine biologist, I see is there's amazing marine life down there. This is not a desert. It is not void of life. These little nodules that are just sitting on the seabed have been sitting there for millions of years.
Yes.
And in those millions of years, which each module having slightly different chemical makeup, different species are living on them. And we find species when we look on nodules that we find nowhere else. We don't even know if they live on other nodules, because we only know about 10% of marine life in the ocean. So we're discovering new stuff everywhere we look. And this is a completely unexplored area. And wherever we look, we find new life. And this life is doing fundamental work for the planet. You've got various types of worms, and isopods, which are like wood lice of the ocean down there, some giant ones, some really tiny ones. But they churn through all the matter that falls down through the thousands of meters of the ocean to the seabed, process that carbon, process the nutrients, keep life in the ocean and life on the planet happening. And we don't know what the effect of disturbing this life is going to be. So if we take out these nodules that they're living on, if we disrupt their ability to reproduce because they may connect over very long distances, and if we change that, we don't know what the impact of that is going to be.
Can I ask a really stupid question? If all this silt and matter is filtering down through the ocean over all these millions of years, why are these nodules just sitting on the sand like they've just been put there yesterday?
It's a great question. We need to understand more about the processes.
Wasn't stupid at all.
That's a very good question.
We don't know the composition of that, the exact composition of every single one of those modules. So from an economical perspective, we also don't know how effective it is going to be the refining of those modules. What is the percentage of copper? What is the percentage of nickel? How are you going to separate that? Do you know that?
I have a
already,
feeling
Alex?
that Alex knows this.
Yeah, we don't know that. Obviously, every nodule is not exactly the same. They say all electrons are exactly the same. That's not the truth of nodules, because nodules they gradually develop over a period of time, maybe billions of years, like you said. The reason why they haven't been covered by now is not entirely clear. But what we do know is that there are probably layers of nodules below them. So there may be more nodules under that we don't see. Yeah. And we also know that there's a lot of very simple life in the sand itself. So at least a meter down, maybe more. There's life in the sand in the sense of not worms and complex multicellular creatures, but maybe single-cell organisms within the sand, as you would find on Earth. So that's why, for example, you're building a house, you dig up all that sand, you're disturbing a lot of life in doing so.
Now, one of the things that I read recently that concerned me, and you guys were talking about this earlier, is these nodules contain metals, which we now use in batteries and in electricity. They have a charge, and there is a suggestion that this charge could actually be making, what did you call it, deep blue oxygen, dark oxygen from the very, very depths of the ocean. And ultimately, the ocean is the main provider of oxygen as we know it. So dig into that for me.
Most oxygen is produced through photosynthesis. And so and mostly in the ocean, historically, that single-celled bacteria in the surface of the ocean, Prochlorococcus, have just processed oxygen, and that has made the atmosphere of our planet. It's made the organisms we have today that have evolved to live off oxygen as an energy source. And so that's when we look at the oxygen of the planet. But this was new, because this study, and it was published in 2024 in Nature Geoscience, showed that they captured oxygen just being produced in the dark from no photosynthesis on one of these nodules. And
nodule, so it wasn't like a reaction.
Well, no, they actually had a few of them in
Okay.
different chambers, and they saw this happening. And they measured a voltage charge, I can't remember, about 0.95 volts, I think, over the surface of this nodule, or these nodules, and oxygen was being produced. So they suggested there was hydrolysis, like with a battery, just splitting between different metals who are acting as the cathode and the anode in there to split the oxygen and the hydrogen to produce oxygen. Now, if this is happening on a vast scale in the deep ocean, that is a completely different oxygen budget for our planet and completely changes the way we view our planet functions. So this was a really surprising and interesting discovery. It hasn't been replicated yet. Beginning of this year, they've gone out and done a whole load more experiments, and we're waiting to see the results of those to see if this is something we can validate and get more confidence in this finding. But it's very interesting. And again, it goes to show the level of knowledge gaps we have around the deep ocean and the way it helps support the planet.
The thing that staggers me the most, that would basically be an additional step into the carbon cycle.
Completely. And it changes the way we view the deep ocean in terms of its ability to process carbon and regulate the atmosphere, regulate life in the ocean, regulate life on the planet. Everything changes with this.
What we need to make sure that what you're saying, it is scientifically backed and prove that we do have an additional step into the carbon cycle, because this could be absolutely incredible and changes so many equations, not just underwater, also above.
I agree, but everybody thinks it's incredible when we see a chemical process, but there's biological processes we don't understand down there as well that are equally important for the carbon cycle and other nutrient cycles of the planet. And so what we need for all of it is to do the scientific work, give it time, go down and say, right, we've really got to understand this environment. We've got to understand the life here. We've got to understand the processes it drives. We've got to understand the implications of any actions here on the planet and on our own lives and how that's going to affect us. And so to do that, we need to put a brake on what's happening in deep seabed mining. Some people call it a moratorium for at least 10 years, maybe more, to get the scientific knowledge we need to have a high degree of confidence that we can do this work without having damage to the planet and to the way we live on. We talked about space first, and we know more about outer space we know than we do about the deep ocean. And we're not going to be able to sustain this spaceship Earth, as the astronauts that just went out on Artemis II called it, if we don't understand these processes.
Mining these nodules for iPhones seems just like the sort of stupid thing that humans would do, isn't it?
Considering that we have all the materials for them already available in landfills.
Exactly.
So,
Mining landfills, I would imagine, would be so much more profitable.
Yeah, for that. Yeah.
Tell me, unaware of this situation, how much deep sea mining is actually happening today? And you're suggesting we stop whatever we're doing so that we know what we're looking at. Are we stopping anything at all? Because I wasn't aware that there's really anything commercial going on. It's a little bit exploration.
There isn't really much. I mean, there's some diamond mining off Namibia and some things like that, but there's not a lot of large-scale deep seabed mining going on because it's not legal to do it in the areas outside of national waters at the moment.
Yeah, there's some deep sea mining happening, but mostly experiments. People are trying to figure out how to make it work, try to attract investors. And the reality is the current approach to deep sea mining is not only extremely destructive, it's financially destructive as well, not only environmentally, but financially, because it's a $1.5 billion project and with a high probability that it'll all fail. And so that's why investors are pulling out. And it's very difficult to get funding for it. In our case, the way we're doing it, we're doing something that's very environmentally friendly, because what we're doing is right now, your iPhone batteries, iPhone metals, they all come from places like Indonesian rainforests, the Congo, where people die, where people are kicked out of their indigenous habitats, where forests are wiped out, just like in the movie Avatar. We're buying iPhones. We can stop buying iPhones and go off grid and, live off the thing if we really care about this stuff and be vegan. But if we want to have the lifestyle that we enjoy, that material has to come from somewhere. And right now it's coming from the forests and mountains that are being blown up by these giant mining companies who build these huge, the strip mining, the huge mines, and they're digging deeper and deeper into the earth and so that creates a lot of risks for destabilization of the surface. A lot of people die. And it also causes problems in other areas. You get sinkholes, all kinds of problems happening. And whereas in our approach, what Atlas is doing, our strategy is use these high precision robots to go and pick up these rocks to fulfill international demand. That is there 100%. Our goal is to really bring down the cost of these metals to such an extent that, and I think about 10% of supply may be sufficient. If we can get to that point, it's just a back of the napkin. We may not need to do any more mining after that. We may at that point reach the point where the cost of energy is so low, because don't forget, these are battery metals. So we want to bring down the cost of batteries. And if we can our strategy brings down the cost of mining by 90%. By bringing down the cost which brings down the cost of materials, which brings down the cost of batteries, that electrification results in the ability to recycle trash. So your landfills, even your food, everything can be manufactured, synthesized, on the spot. So the circular economy, all that stuff becomes entirely possible because the cost of energy becomes so low.
As with most people hearing that, I believe, Alex, that we'd be more concerned about it going purely to AI and new consumables that we don't already have as an additionality rather than a displacement of what we're currently using in our energy mix and things like that. But say you are going to go and deploy these thousands of little robots and they're going to start doing this up.
Sure.
Nick, as a scientist, what would you make sure that you want to hold Alex to account on? Where would you be looking and what would you want to see day in, day out as proof that the ecosystem is going to, be okay with this? I'm not going to say,
it's not a
thrive
UK
in that
system,
scenario.
it's an international system.
The ecosystem.
Oh, sorry, the ecosystem.
You're talking about local ecosystem or global ecosystem?
That's a very good question.
Yeah, the way deep sea mining, I'm just going to jump into the regulation for a bit
Sure.
at the moment, is when the law of the sea was set up in the 1980s, there was a lot of interest that had been building from the 60s about mining these modules. And so there was a whole bit brought into that about regulation of the deep seabed environment. And the International Seabed Authority, which is based in Kingston, Jamaica, is the one developed with developing the regulations for that at the moment. And they meet at least twice a year to go through, and they're driving that process forward and doing it. There's a number of things they're regulating here that I think will get in the way of the ambition of Alex's plan, actually, to a degree, which is that, one, there's only a few small areas of the ocean that they've licensed for exploration at the moment and that could be mined. And those are mainly in the tropical Pacific, in what's called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. Those have not been licensed for mining yet, and the regulations for mining are very dependent on the environmental regulations that are being developed, amongst other things. The other thing is the payment regime.
Canadian company, sorry, that
EMC.
The metal company started off as Deep Green and then became the metals company. And Deep Green, I must admit, I've known Deep Green for a while. They have all the same arguments you do as well about why what they were doing was
they're doing dredging.
environmentally sustainable.
But they're directly opposed to what they're
exactly.
doing.
But they still used all the same arguments.
I don't know.
So the metals company, have been down this route. But if we get back to the regulation, the payment regime is also a part of it. So to get a license, you have to be tied to a country. And so a lot of small island countries have been tapped up by big corporations saying, if you let us get a license with you, then, we'll give you a share of the profits. But the profit return rate on that is very low. And so there's a lot of negotiation now about what that should really be and what is a fair return to those countries. The other thing in there is that it's very clear that deep seabed mining should not displace land mining in the regulations. And this is an opposition from a lot of African countries that actually get a lot of money from on-land mining, is that they don't want to see that displacement because they will get less return for their economies, and they need that economy to develop, than they would do if it came from deep seabed mining. So they don't want to see deep seabed mining either. And so we've got a lot of these other factors as well, economic and as well as environmental, that are affecting the negotiations at the moment and where we get to. From an environmental point of view, one of the key factors for me is the precautionary principle, or precautionary approach, which is captured in international law and basically says that when there's considerable uncertainty, the legal emphasis is not to act and to get rid of the uncertainty before you do act, because we can't risk the environment just because we don't know. So it saves that lack of knowledge being a reason for doing something.
How much do we know about the Indonesian rainforests being wiped out for nickel mining? Like, how much research have we done in terms of the impact of that and measuring that?
And they have a
documenting
license?
that?
Are they doing this legally, or are we talking about unlicensed, illegal
most of it is
activity?
legal because they're in our iPhones, they're in our cars,
No,
they're in
a
our
lot,
houses.
Alex. But if we can learn something from those mistakes that we've made in the past, why not?
Oh, it's
do something?
ongoing.
What I'm asking, it is ridiculous that in an age where we're sending people to circumnavigate the moon around, we still need 10 years to deploy a research team to, of course, do a study on a very vast area. But in 10 years, the world, if you think about the past 10 years, the world changed like 15 times. So to be able to come to at least a degree of an answer with a degree of certainty of 50, 75, and then 100% that we remove the precautionary principle, why not? We have to start
Because there's too much damage that happens before that. 10 years is a lot of damage. So if you think of how much damage is happening today into indigenous populations, wildlife, globally, by getting those minerals from where we're getting them now, unless we have some magical alternative, which nobody has proposed. Everyone
And not
says,
to mention the climate change.
yeah, of course. And all that, we need to stop that now. We can't wait 10 years. So the precautionary principle is a beautiful narrative, but the reality is we're hurtling towards a precipice. And the climate, the ecosystems around the world are all collapsing. And there's no debate about that. We know that. So if we know that's happening, then we have to act now, and we have to act at scale. And the only way to do that is through getting these minerals from places which are not rich in biodiversity, which don't support a huge amount of biomass per square acre. You can measure the amount of biomass that's supported. But even if you take the entire vertical column from each square mile of land.
Alex, the solution you're proposing is the one that's going to make you a whole load of money, but isn't actually going to address any of those problems. And that's the bottom line of it.
How is that possible?
It's not going to stop.
Demand.
No, yeah, but it's not going to be able to operate at scale because the whole regulatory regime around it's not going to let that happen. It's just not going to be that way. And since when have we ever opened up an industry and it's stopped damage?
It happens all the time.
It happens.
So, for example, when electric cars came in, now they're replacing regular cars at scale.
Are they there, or are we just not experiencing more cars? In terms of developing economies, buying more cars and things like that?
Yeah, China's just more
actually,
cars.
we're building more cars, but we're also reducing the amount of CO2 by cars, and we're also reducing the amount of smog. You walk out in London today, there's almost no smog compared to 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
It's true. And we now see that displacement of those damaging effects into those very indigenous communities that you're talking about, that you're now trying to address. So I totally understand we keep kicking this can down the road and finding more and more problems. But I think it's fair to stop kicking the can at some point. There is an evidence.
We need electrification.
Yeah, you flood supply with cheap materials that you've got from a new source. You don't reduce demand by doing that. You just bring the price down.
You increase demand because we don't want right now. Here's the problem: the access to technology is only if you're in England. I'm from Boston. We have access to someone who's working at McDonald's making $15 an hour is in the top 5 to 10% of the global income. They're the elite. They're the rich people. Okay, within this gated community we call England, that's not rich, but in the global perspective, these are the elites. Okay,
1%.
Let's be clear about that. So what we want to do is make sure that everybody in the world has access to technology. Everybody has access to AI. Everybody has access to the things that we enjoy, so that we don't just say, okay, these are some new rules we're putting up so that we can be special and privileged. We want everybody in the world to have access to all these resources. And to do that, the cost has to come down and production has to go up. There's no way around it. So everybody can have an iPhone or some kind of smartphone. We don't want to be elitist and say, hey, only we want to have the fancy stuff. Everybody else should just make do with being technologically literate. And
they do, but to be able to produce that, we already have the supply chain waiting for us to be harvested around landfills around. The problem is
mathematically not yet. We will soon.
Okay, but the US has already built up enough battery recycling capacity to fulfill the needs until 2030. The UK and Europe will soon follow up with that. Sure. So if we're talking about just the mere use
but the US is 4% of the global economy, percentage-wise.
There is China, there is India, but nonetheless, we are still working in a world, in a technology where by design principles, we're not optimized yet across the entire life cycle of each and every single product we just finished to discuss, where is a cell phone, where is a battery pack for an EV. Okay, so we do have treasures literally waiting for us.
100%.
And they're only treasures when they're actually valuable. If you flood the market and make those cheap, then that's no longer going to be economically viable.
The cost of recycling, or let's call it the downstream infrastructure, the recycling infrastructure, it is not at scale, or it is not as good as it is the mining infrastructure. If you see those diggers inside mines, Jesus, they're big like building blocks.
And they burn a lot of gas.
They burn a lot of gas. All the genset, they burn a lot of gas. Yeah. But the recycling industry, on the other hand, you see those tiny little sheds with stuff stuck inside. One of those diggers cannot fit inside. In terms of production, of materials, we do have the materials. It's just to bring that downstream recycling up to par with the virgin production. My concern, it is a very simple one. It is a combination of both of you guys. For me, I am aware of the need of electrify the world. We are going towards an ever increased consumption in energy due to the electrification in general, transportation, but also because of the artificial intelligence and everything that comes with it. So the data centers, the production of semiconductors, and yada, yada, yada. Okay. On the other hand, if we are displacing one environmental damage from above the ground to another one below the sea surface, there is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
But not
We need to do a proper analysis, but it's not going to take 10 years.
We need to do a proper analysis, but not in 10 years because we don't have that time.
We don't have that time.
The way to scale up the time is to scale up the investment. And we really need to scale up the investment into discovery in the ocean and discovery of ocean life, particularly. We're talking about treasures that we're not valuing yet.
Okay.
Life is treasure. It exists nowhere else in this universe. It's here. We're going off and spending billions just to get somebody to the moon. For $100 million, we could go and discover 100,000 new species in the ocean in the next 5 years. Somebody just give us $100 million. I'm working with an organization called the Ocean Census at the moment, which is actually a collection of about 650 organizations that are all working together on this. They've got ships, they've got people trained, but they need the investment to get out there and do this. We could do it.
Well, actually, that's also an area where Atlas can help. So Atlas plans to deploy thousands and thousands of these. And to be honest, the ISA doesn't have any teeth. They're not going to be able to stop us. There are a lot of parts of the world where the ISA has no authority. So I'm not at all worried about ISA. ISA is very fragile, and it's...
Sorry, what's ISA?
It's the International Seafloor Authority, or Seabed Authority.
Which is actually, it's part of the United Nations. So I don't know if you're saying the United Nations is very fragile.
United Nations is fragile, and they have no...
It is the established international legal mechanism.
I know. There are many times I wish the UN had more power than it did, but it didn't, and we saw that.
It's certainly lacking in enforcement in ocean. We know that.
Yeah.
Not only ocean, but so many areas. Yeah. And I don't want to get into politics, but we've seen time and again the UN really has no teeth. So I'm not worried about the UN as an obstacle to deep sea mining.
So you're saying you'd just do it anyway?
No, I'm saying we'll just go with the countries that are going to give us permits, whatever those countries are. So we do it legally. But
increasingly, your markets are going to care where these resources come from. And ultimately, consumers will be swayed by what the UN say as to what's right or wrong. And therefore, you don't want to be blacklisted and flooding the market with...
100%. Yeah, all the companies that oppose electrification are also opposing deep sea mining because they fundamentally oppose electrification.
I think there's a lot of car manufacturers that are not opposed to electrification and in the middle of building EVs at the moment that have said they're not going to use deep sea mining sourced minerals in their batteries. So take Volvo, for example.
Those companies, what happened is they opposed deep electrification. Then they went out of business. They were bought by other companies.
Volvo's not been bought by anybody else, and it's not opposed to electrification. In fact, it is building very good EVs.
Yeah, sure. All these companies try to do hydrogen rather than electrification. And they all tried to, which is basically a disguised fossil fuel. But that's just another
business model. They were just because they
industry.
Tried hydrogen and wherever they go with. That's a different argument.
It's a consortium. It's a group of companies that have a common interest in fossil fuel related things. And now they don't produce their own batteries. They buy everything from China.
I think what it highlights,
and they're forced to adapt because the industries are failing.
Consciously trying to have a morality and ethic approach to their supply chain on this basis. And at the moment, if deep sea mining is dredging, then they're saying we're not using deep sea mining.
These companies have a long history of going against what's right and ethical.
But interestingly, if you can prove to them your deep sea mining is harmless and
not harmless,
better,
everything causes harm.
Okay,
Me walking down the street causes harm.
Better than other versions, then maybe those companies will actually be interested in it because of the ethical and moral implications which they're currently standing.
I believe all the existing mining companies will be interested because right now they're blowing up the entire planet to get those resources. And this is a great way to change their image.
Alex, how long is it going to be before we see your robots deployed on the beach?
Gosh, it depends on
down there.
If I get funding this year, we can have them in deployment in about a year. Small deployments, but our cost advantage is so vast. So a normal deep sea mining project is $1.5 billion.
And who is holding you to account? Who are you reporting to regarding the ecological impacts of what you're doing?
International law.
Which you've just debunked because you said it was toothless and you're going to do it anyway.
No. International law, which means that we work entirely within permits. So whoever gives permits, or we work with permit holders. So we're not doing anything that's outside of permitting.
Okay.
So as long as someone's permitted to do it, they can hire us, or we'll do it ourselves. We'll get the permits and do it ourselves.
Nick, do you think that sounds feasible?
I think people are going to try and do this. I think we need to have more suppliers, and there's already a growing list of suppliers. If I can read out the full list, and just to show this is not all one group of deeply climate skeptic companies. This is a wide range of companies that have just an ethical approach to this. Microsoft, for example.
Yeah.
I don't know. Microsoft has a...
Microsoft is trying to invest in carbon offsetting and trying to reduce its energy budget. It's doing a lot. BMW, Volvo, Volkswagen, Rivian, Renault, Google, Samsung, Patagonia. Not saying they're not you're not saying they're not ethical about the climate and environment, are you?
I don't know much about Patagonia.
Daimler, Ford, General Motors, Tiffany and Co.
These are all companies
that have said they will not use minerals sourced from deep seabed mining in their supply chains, and that's growing. So
these companies,
so going back to your question, which is it feasible? I don't think the market's going to let it happen. I think the market doesn't want these minerals, and I think we're going to see more companies coming out and saying this because their shareholders are not going to want to see them deriving these minerals from the deep seabed. And so I think that's going to be ultimately a major decision factor for capital and therefore for activities.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you, guys. It was a wonderful conversation.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was really good. Thank you very much for being on Raw Green, and catch up soon.
Nick, Alex, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Raw Green. If you made it this far, you probably enjoyed it. So don't forget to hit subscribe and follow our podcast. It's an awesome way to support our community. At OBI, we're all about research, life cycle assessment, and green tech innovation. Stay in touch through our socials or visit our website. Links are ready for you in the description. Catch you in the next episode. Ciao.